Hello all. It's a pleasure to be virtually discussing and providing food for thought on a topical issue with you all today. And I'd like to say a big thank you to Boud Electrons Festival 2021 for having me. For those of you who've never heard of me before, my name is Emma Farquharson, and I go by the performance brand name of The Forest Weaver. I'm a proudly South African opera singer, concert recitalist, vocal coach, music educator, and champion of female Western art music composers in the classical tradition. Before I trained as a classical soloist and opera singer, I was a chorister at both school and national level. This meant that I've now accumulated over 16 years of experience, and I've had ample time to study and reflect upon the concept of standard repertoire and how these lists are established by performers, musicians, audiences, and members of music academia alike within almost all areas of the classical music industry. I studied at Rhodes University from 2015 to 2018, ultimately majoring with distinction and academic full colors in instrumental music studies with a focus specifically on vocal performance. In 2017, my impresario Douglas Bullis and his wife Elisoon Ross approached me with an unusual concert proposal, one that would prove to be a fundamental turning point in my career as a then student performer. On the 11th of November 2017, in collaboration with violist Lizzie Rennie and pianist Gareth Robertson, A Feather on the Breath of God was staged. Popular tunes and arias aside, this program also featured works of Hildegard von Bingen and Rebecca Clark, which Lizzie and I arranged for voice and viola. This concert was fully booked and met with wide acclaim, and one of the recurring comments made to me by audience members was that they wished the concert had featured more female composers or more works by Hildegard and Rebecca Clark. I took note of this, and in July 2018, I staged my second production on the Makanda Grahamstown National Arts Arena Festival, A Feather on the Breath of God. This was take 2. This was a new and revised program showcasing the works of 10 female Western art music composers spanning 700 years of music history. We had 4 shows. All of these were sold out and were met with rave reviews. I turned this concert into a case study for my honors research paper, asking audiences to fill out questionnaires, probing them about their understanding of repertoire lists and their personal music tastes. I also interviewed my fellow musicians and 3 South African vocal academics from 3 tertiary vocal institutions in South Africa. In November 2018, I submitted A Feather on the Breath of God, a qualitative and quantitative inquiry into the performative state of female Western art music composers in select South African tertiary vocal institutions. Staging this concert and producing this research paper proved performatively and academically challenging and rewarding. In compiling a culturally and historically rich program, I luckily had access to several anthologies on women in music, entitled Women Composers Music Through the Ages. At that point, I think there were about 10 volumes. They're now 12 plus. I spent hours poring over names and histories, gobsmacked by the sheer number of female composers that had existed and exist now, none of whom I had ever been taught about at either school or university, and many of whom had made great contributions compositionally to music and to music history. In working with medieval music in particular, I had to adjust to singing using the free rhythm of plain chant, modes, and also be singing in Latin. The cellist at the time, Caleb Vaughan-Jones and I played with the accompaniment of these pieces, opting usually for droning to give my soprano voice a strong color to contrast against. But scores were not always accessible, and modern notations of ancient works even less so, which meant that certain pieces that I'd been interested in didn't end up getting included in the program. Phase 2 of my research involved assessing the musical tastes, reasoning, gender identities, and music knowledge of 4 sets of audiences in the form of questionnaires. Their answers revealed the following fascinating findings. We'd be here all day if I were to list the research paper in its entirety, so I am going to say it in summation. But if you would like to read my paper as a whole, please feel free to drop me an email and I will send it your way. Anyway, point 1. Most concert attendees weren't music practitioners or academics, which called into question whether the public were more concerned with or interested in airing the works of female composers than music academia. I felt this, however, was a clear indicator that public opinion has the potential to be very influential in the academic sphere and performance spheres, and in helping to change what music lands up on concert programs and prescribed competition lists. 2. Many respondents identified as members of the LGBTQIA+ community. This inferred that the issue of gender equality in performance and academia isn't an essentialized male versus female issue, but it's rather one that concerns and interests all, regardless of gender and sexual orientation. 3. Most people regarded music to be of performative interest and value if the music stimulated visualization, made them feel transported and spiritually uplifted, but also piqued their interest enough to go home and do further research on the composers themselves, or that particular genre of music. Technical demand, and whether the song piece was an opus or not, rarely featured in the answers of my audiences, which was very interesting. The final response was that they would attend another concert along this theme. I say interesting because historically one of the biggest sexist arguments to denying inclusion of music by women in performance spaces and academia was that the work was too small. I have to argue that if the work of male composers, big or small, can land up on the graded repertoire lists, then surely the same can be said for women. One of the comments I will never forget an audience member writing was, "I am bored to tears with standard repertoire, and I will definitely attend a concert of this nature again." From a superficial yet practical stance, it has to be said, this means that incorporating music by women, and specifically underperformed rather than overdone items of repertoire, can garner public interest and support. Point 4. Society in general does not have equal access to information about women in music. This is specifically to do with women in music in history, but also their scores, extant scores that have been transcribed and made into modern notation. This is a reality that they expressed dissatisfaction about and insisted was an obvious gender gap that needed to change. This is summed up perfectly by a newspaper review of the concert series that I did. It was penned by a man called Mr. Raymond Perrier, a good friend of mine now, and he said, "Sometimes you don't know what you don't know." The lack of knowledge and the lack of guidance on how to attain that knowledge is what ultimately affects music scholarship and what music is heard, and performed publicly, and survives music history. As educators, we need to recognize this and actively work to bring in books, e-resources, performance opportunities, as well as share what we have and know with one another to bridge this gap if we are going to change this fact. 5. Cast discussions suggested that the instrument one plays can have a direct effect upon what music one considers to be standard repertoire worthy, but that there can be exceptions to the rule. And finally, public and academic opinion were in agreement that there is a gender gap in the Western art music canon currently, that this is owing to a lack of equal access and knowledge of resources, and that the majority of the music that they heard in the program indicated to them that music by women should be assigned to graded and post-school syllabi for public performance and or music analysis. Cut to October 2020, well into the pandemic. Concerts SA, SAMRO, and others gave me a digital mobility grant to support my curating and singing in an interprovincial concert documentary that championed female composers from the Western art music canon, past and present, global and local. It was launched to the public on the 8th of January 2020 and to schools and universities thereafter. My ambition with this project was and is to continue bridging the knowledge gap in a time where performers and musicians also needed to stay performatively active and receive some financial support. Reaching out to 10 South African musicians, creatives, performers, and citizens, I produced Herstory, an e-concert documentary showcasing the lives and works of 15 female composers spanning over 800 years of music history. Schools and universities who purchased this educational resource have also received a collection of custom illustrated worksheets to use as a framework to guide students in their independent research on what dynamics and contexts to consider when studying the lives and compositional outputs of women in music. I'm excited to share snippets of the ever-evolving Herstory with you all today. My future ambitions with it are to secure more funding to make the videography of each song or piece of an equal quality, to have more instrumental and orchestral opuses like Dances in the Canebrake by Florence Beatrice Price, recorded with a live orchestra, and to further increase the cultural diversity of voice and performer in this offering. COVID-19 insisted that I get jiggy with technology, and I'm very proud of my videographic first real public attempts at it. From a personal stance, I intend ultimately to specialize with a Masters of Education in Music, Performance and Education in the arts, when funding allows. I was offered a place by Guildhall and the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland. My future research will focus on the field of female Western art music composers and how best to teach educators and students to successfully make standard repertoire lists gender equitable at school level, tertiary level, and on stage. My life and performance career, therefore, is an ongoing conversation in how to achieve this at grade-appropriate levels. For most of us, COVID-19 had a major impact on our careers. For myself, I delved into pursuing teaching more, a portfolio career, as Guildhall would say, where I focused more on my vocal and music teaching practice. As a vocal coach at both a co-ed preparatory school and independent girls' high school, I have had the opportunity to bring my performative passion for women in music into the studio, ensuring that women in music featured prominently on my students' repertoire lists. A junior school student of mine, recently sang Stand Up, a contemporary pop gospel rebellion song, if you will, about Harriet Tubman, which was included in the film Harriet, co-written by Cynthia Erivo with Joshua Bryan Campbell. Another high school student of mine is incorporating Barbara Strozzi's Che si può fare into her grade 4 or 5 ABRSM exam next year as aria of choice. The high school in question also purchased Herstory and set its viewing and as a research project for the grade 9s, and I am very much looking forward to hearing and seeing how that unfolded. To me, a multi-pronged approach appears to be the best way to achieve transformation and gender equity on stage and in the classroom. Technology is making it easier to bridge the knowledge gaps and information access required to reach wide audiences. And I, for one, am having a blast discovering how others are using technological mediums to further the cause. Take Sakira Ventura's interactive world map of female composers, or Hadi Karim's 3D CG color renderings of male and female classical composers as well as celebrities. Both aid teachers and students in identifying female composers past and present from around the world to spark an interest in their lives and works. I believe that my role as a performer, a vocal coach, and an educator is to do my bit and do my best to ensure that one day it won't be necessary to put the word female in front of the word composer. If we want to have a future generation of classically appreciative music audiences, singers, and musicians, then it is vital that they see themselves in the programs they attend, perform, and are educated in. That they are told the too long neglected stories of women in music past and present. Stories that are complex, nuanced, stories that others have had to retrieve and dig out of somewhere deep in music history. Stories that acknowledge the aid and support that women in music received. Stories that laud the achievements as well as the hindrances in their careers and their domestic lived experiences. Stories that tell the truth and bring to us excitingly unfamiliar melodies on the air that eventually settle on the stages and in the classrooms, like the words of familia or friends.